Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get into our second segment of the day here on the show, I do want to remind you yet again that if you want to interact with the show in a more direct fashion, consider making yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. Great way to contribute and interact to the show. You can do one of two things. Either click that $sign in the comment section, leave a tip or donation, or you can either leave a question, comment, or concern here, and I will address it on air. As always, it's a great way, like I said, to contribute and interact, and this makes the show that much better. But without further ado, let's jump right into our second segment of the day, transitioning from start to sit. And unfortunately, we have to talk about the bad side of fantasy football. The decisions you have to make where you have to bench a certain player. And all of these players, through no fault of their own really, mainly due to circumstance, maybe due to team turmoil, aren't necessarily in the best situations to succeed this week. So without further ado, let's talk about them. Starting off with a pretty simple choice at the QB position, even though this matchup seemingly could work in his favor. And that is Derek Carr. And this one's more of the Saints looking like they really have no hope this season, rather than, the exceptional play of the Falcons defense, which we all know can be scored upon and easily. It's just that when I think about this Saints team and where they were at the start of the season compared to now, and how they look in terms of the future, which is very bleak, considering that they have the worst cap situation in the entire NFL, and they've already had so many injuries to account for this season, that when I think about what Derek Carr has to do for this team to succeed, and he's also one of the older quarterbacks in the NFL, even against teams like the Falcons, where you may not win this game, but you feel like it could be competitive just because of the atrocious issues that the Falcons' pass defense has. This just does not feel like a team equipped to put up points and gain a shootout week in, week out. So that's why I feel like Derek Carr is not someone who I would trust going forward. He was actually someone who I was a little bit intrigued about before the season even, just because of, his certain traits that could stand out in this team, for example, his deep ball. But now it's all coming to a head for the Saints. And they've really not been able to answer the call week in, week out. And it was all summed up in that loss to Carolina, which clearly makes them one of, if not the worst teams in the NFL. And so that's why I feel like there's really no hope in many Saints players this week, and it will come to a head at the end of this segment as well. But Derek Carr had to address the sticky situation he is in terms of real life and in terms of how we have to view him from a fantasy perspective. Then the running back position, this one's a little bit weird because this guy certainly has had a share of fantastic fantasy performances this season, but this matchup seems a little bit more weird now. All because of a key trade deadline acquisition by the opponent. Of course, I'm talking about Joe Mixon going against the Lions and their new defensive end in Zadarius Smith. But the reason why Zadarius Smith was such an important acquisition in terms of the Lions' hopes for this season is because he's not just an edge rusher. He can move along the line with ease, can play any position really along the line that you need him to, and thus he creates and wreaks a lot of havoc in both the run and pass game. So the Texans, who really have had their offensive struggles, their line has not been playing up to par, even though it has some of the best tackles and guards in the league at those respective positions. They still have not proven that they can hold up. C.J. Stroud's been sacked a lot more than last season. And, this offense has had its share of injuries. Let's be real here. There's not going to have Stephon Diggs for the rest of the season. And this is the last game before, they hope that Nico Collins can come back. So It does seem like a game where Joe Mixon could be a big X factor, but I'm more concerned about the whole overall state of this Texans offense rather than, how effective Joe Mixon can be. Because chances are, if your offensive line isn't protecting you, if, C.J. Stroud is uncomfortable, your receivers aren't getting any separation, what makes you think that the run game can have any say in the matter? And it's just been also the Lions dominate you so comprehensively that you really have no offensive options unless, you can generate, the run game, which would make people think that Joe Mixon could be a starter. But now that the Lions have Zadarius Smith, their run defense looks more potent than ever. And as much as I respect Joe Mixon for what he's done for the Texans this season, in fact, I would name him their offensive MVP this season. It's not looking very promising this week for the Texans in this matchup because it's a tough task to find a way to wear down that Lions defense, even sans Aiden Hutchinson. So I wish that I could say that Joe Mixon can play well in this one, but it's not looking good for his prospects here. And then at the wide receiver position, a guy I'm all too familiar with this season. A personal fantasy football team. Someone who really hasn't proven himself on this Chicago Bears team. Someone who really hasn't separated himself from the pack in terms of that skill position core, but in terms of actually helping this team generate momentum. And that is DJ Moore. And we saw last week with someone who I feel like has lost his way a little bit with this team. I feel like things are coming to a head with the play of this offense taking big steps forward and then giant steps backward. Well, with that loss to Arizona after, it seemed like they were building something. And now DJ Moore, out of all of them, perhaps being the most frustrated by a situation. Because think about it. DJ Moore was the only one who had carryover from last season. The only one in that receiving core who had kind of an established role. And to see, Roma Dunze and Keenan Allen come into the skill position room, this could have been the opportunity to either A, help them out, or B, show them what being a Bears wide receiver is all about. And he hasn't done either of those things. And that's why the Bears have gone from hopeful to bleak in a matter of weeks, even though this team still has the talent to achieve certain goals this season. And so, in this matchup against, I believe, it is the Patriots, this one should feel manageable for both Moore and the Bears to gain back some of their momentum. But the Patriots are just a tough team, They're not as soft as their coach assumes they are. No kind of shade thrown there, but it has to be said. But they are a team that you can't overlook. And the Bears are at a point where they're either going to look like they're clicking or they're going to fall off the rails week in, week out. And so DJ Moore, week in, week out, is either going to be someone who I regard highly and want to see more out of, or someone who's just going to falter under the pressure. And so that's why he's going to find his place on this list. In the tight end position, this one's a little bit of a weird one because a lot of people have been saying different things about this matchup. And, I feel like this could be a blowout. And, I wouldn't be justified in my take. But this Broncos-Chiefs game, in my mind, is one that I'm a little bit intrigued to see play out. And especially with Travis Kelce in the mix here. Because a lot of people think this Broncos defense is not capable of slowing down these superior teams. They crumbled under the pressure against Baltimore last week. and now they're facing the only remaining unbeaten team in the league. However, the Broncos' defense is still the number 3 scoring defense in the league, and the Chiefs aren't this powerful 8-0 team. In fact, I just learned this today, the lowest point differential of any 8-0 team in history at plus 56 is what the Chiefs are right now. And so, if they're not operating at a high level on offense, chances are this Broncos team can have an impact in this game. And who I really love in that Broncos defense are their linebackers, very physical types. I really like Barton, I really like Singleton, and how aggressive they are in terms of blitz packages, in terms of going sideline to sideline. It's really going to affect the play of Travis Kelce in this one. So look for Travis Kelce to maybe not have much of an impact as you think, and for the Chiefs to kind of struggle in this one as well. Maybe not lose this game outright, but struggle to handle this Broncos defense. And then last but not least, again, let's talk about the Saints. Because on the defense as well, it's not all offensive problems with the Saints. It's defense as well. Because as much as we want to talk about the Falcons' defense not stopping anyone, have you seen the Saints? And even though, the Falcons' offense kind of has cracks papering over it itself, it's still one that can move the football if Kirk Cousins does not get pressured. And I don't think the Saints can generate pressure. And so look for Kirk Cousins to get the ball out efficiently, quickly, into weapons that can create outside of the short to intermediate areas of the field. And so that's why I feel like the Saints is pretty self-explanatory, even though, people might be looking at the Falcons and say, this could be a chance for the Saints to put up points. No, in this one, I feel like the Saints defense will prove to be the worst one. Let me know what you think in the comments, because it's an interesting situation. I love talking about the guys you might have to bench, the players you might have to bench in this week, because it's kind of what you have to consider when you're playing fantasy football. Sometimes players aren't as cracked up as they look like week in, week out. So, let me know what you think in the comments about this segment. Coming up after the break, we transfer over to talk of implications in the fantasy world for both NFL and college football. And we start off in the world of college football, so don't go anywhere. We will be right back after this short break.
Looking for your daily